Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into international tourism, looking specifically at how things shaped up in 2023.
That's right. We're using the latest International Tourism Highlights report from UN Tourism, the 2024 edition. It gives a fantastic overview.
It really does. Think of this as our way of pulling out the key insights for you, how travel bounced back after, well, those really tough few years, and what trends are emerging now.
Exactly. After the huge disruption of 2020 to 2022, 2023 was all about the rebound. So the big questions are, how far did we come and what's different now?
Right. Our mission, if you like, is to get you the most important takeaways, maybe some surprising facts without getting bogged down in all the numbers.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so globally, the headline number seems to be 1.3 billion international arrivals in 2023. What does that tell us?
Well, 1.3 billion. It sounds massive, and it is, but context is key, right? That puts us at about 89% of where we were back in 2019, before everything changed.
89%. So not quite back to the old peak, but getting closer.
Definitely a powerful resurgence. But, the money side is maybe even more telling.
The receipts. How did they look?
International tourism receipts reached USD 1.5 trillion. And that number is actually 98% of the pre-pandemic value.
98%. Wow. So spending was almost completely back.
Almost completely, yeah. And if you factor in total export revenues, which includes passenger transport and things like that,
Right, the broader picture.
that hit USD 1.8 trillion. Now, interestingly, in current US dollars, that actually exceeds the 2019 figure.
Exceeds. Really?
Yeah, though when you adjust for inflation in real terms, it's about 99%. So basically right back there in terms of economic power, even if the raw number of travelers wasn't quite identical.
That's fascinating. So what drove this? What got people moving and spending again in 2023?
It seems like a combination of factors, really.
Yeah.
Number one was definitely pent-up demand. People were just ready.
After being stuck for so long, yeah. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Then you had the reopening of key destinations, particularly in Asia, which is a big piece of the puzzle. Plus, increased air connectivity helped massively, and lots of countries made visa processes easier.
Okay, makes sense. A lot of things coming together. But we know the recovery wasn't even everywhere. Let's break it down by region. Where was the comeback strongest?
Oh, the Middle East.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt, it was the only region to actually beat its 2019 numbers.
Beat them? By how much?
Arrivals were up 31% compared to 2019. That's 93 million arrivals. And the receipts, up 45%, hitting USD 137 billion. Just incredible performance.
31% above 2019 levels. Any particular countries driving that?
Yeah, some really stand out. Qatar saw a huge 90% increase. Saudi Arabia was up 56%. Bahrain up 44%.
Wow. What's behind that, do you think?
Well, there's been significant investment in tourism in the region, plus those visa facilitation measures we mentioned. And you have to think major events played a role, too.
Good point. Okay, what about Europe? Always a huge destination.
Europe also had a very strong showing. They reached 707 million arrivals, which is about 95% of their 2019 numbers.
So almost back as well. What was driving demand there?
A lot of it was intra-regional travel, Europeans visiting other European countries. But also, strong demand for the U.S. market was really noticeable.
And did any European countries actually surpass 2019?
Oh, yes, quite a few, actually. Albania had a massive jump, up 56%. Andorra was up 31%, Armenia 22%. Even some of the giants like France, Turkey, Portugal, Spain, Greece, they all saw numbers slightly above 2019.
And the spending in Europe?
Also strong. Receipts were actually up 6% compared to 2019, even in real terms. So people were spending more.
Okay, very solid for Europe. Let's move across the globe. How did Africa and the Americas fare?
Africa saw a really good recovery, too, reaching 96% of pre-pandemic arrivals. That's about 66 million people. A lot of that driven by European markets again.
Any standouts in Africa?
Definitely. Ethiopia was up 33% over 2019. Cabo Verde up 27%. Tanzania 25%. Morocco and Mauritius also exceeded their 2019 levels. Better flight connections were key there.
Good to hear. And the Americas?
The Americas recovered to about 90%, with 200 million arrivals. Interregional travel was huge there, especially U.S. travelers heading to the Caribbean and Central America.
Which destinations benefited most?
Places like Puerto Rico saw a huge 59% increase, El Salvador up 40%, Colombia 35%, the Dominican Republic 25%. So some really bright spots.
Right. And that leaves Asia and the Pacific. We know they opened up later. How did that impact their 2023?
Yeah, definitely a slower recovery overall for Asia Pacific. They reached about 65% of 2019 levels, around 237 million arrivals. That later reopening was the main factor.
But things are picking up now.
They are, yes. especially with China reopening fully. That's making a big difference. And even with a slower overall pace, some places did exceptionally well. The Maldives was up 10% in 2019, Fiji up 4%, Mongolia up 3%.
Interesting mix then.
Very much so. South Asia, for instance, recovered to about 85%, while Northeast Asia was much further behind, around 55%. So big variations within the region.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the economic impact. We touched on the receipt numbers, but how significant is tourism in the grand scheme of global economics?
It's huge. That USD 1.8 trillion in total export revenues we mentioned for 2023, that represents about 23% of the world's trade and services.
23%.
Yeah, and about 6% of all exports, goods, and services combined. Now, those percentages are slightly down from 2019. It was 27% and 7% back then. But it still shows just how vital tourism is to global trade flows.
And particularly for certain economies, right?
Absolutely critical. For many developing nations, and especially for SID small islands, developing states, tourism isn't just important, it can be the main economic driver, often over 50% of their total exports.
50%. Wow, it
Yeah.
really puts it into perspective.
It's their lifeline in many cases. Foreign currency, jobs, development, it all hinges on tourism.
So if you rank all global exports, where does tourism sit now?
Okay, so the latest detailed ranking we have is for 2022. In that year, tourism was the fifth largest export category globally.
Fifth largest. What was ahead of it?
Automotive products, food, chemicals, and fuels. Interestingly, back in 2019, tourism was actually third. So there's been a bit of a shuffle in the rankings post-pandemic.
Still very high up the list, though. Now, what about the direct contribution to GDP, the TD-GDP?
Right. Tourism direct gross domestic product. That's the value added directly by tourism industries, hotels, restaurants, transport, attractions, that kind of thing.
How did that recover?
Pretty well, actually. The estimate for 2023 is USD 3.4 trillion, which is basically back to the 2019 level in nominal terms.
Back to the 2019 level, that's quite something after the pandemic lows.
It is, although as a share of total global GDP, it's now around 3%, whereas it was 4% in 2019. So the global economy grew a bit faster overall, but still recovering that direct contribution after the massive hits in 2020 and 2021 is remarkable. Shows the resilience.
Definitely. Okay, people always love to know the specifics. Where did everyone go and who spent the most? Let's talk top destinations and spenders for 2023.
Sure. So for arrivals, the most visited country was France, hitting 100 million arrivals.
100 million. Still number one.
Yep. Followed by Spain with 85 million, then the USA at 66 million, Italy at 57, and Turkey at 55 million.
Any interesting moves in that top arrivals list compared to before the pandemic?
Oh yeah, quite a few shifts. Italy, Turkey, Mexico, Germany, Austria, they all moved up one spot. The UK jumped 3 places, which is quite significant.
Right.
And Greece climbed 4 spots.
Interesting. Okay, now receipts. Who earned the most tourist dollars?
The USA leads by a significant margin there, pulling in USD 189 billion.
Wow, big number.
Huge. Spain was second with 92 billion, then the UK came in third with 74 billion, followed by France and Italy.
Any notable changes in the earnings rankings?
Yes, again, some interesting movement. The UK moving up 2 spots to third is a big one. Italy also up 1. The UAE made a really big leap, up 7 places into 6th. And Turkey and Canada both climbed 5 spots in the earnings list.
Fascinating to see those economic shifts playing out. What about the other side? Which country's citizens spent the most traveling out?
China is back on top as the biggest spender. Chinese tourists spent USD 196 billion abroad in 2023.
Back in the lead. Who else is in that top group?
The USA was second in spending at 150 billion,
Yeah.
then Germany, the UK, and France.
Any surprising climbers in the spending ranks?
India is definitely one to watch. They climbed into the top 10, landing at 10th place with a massive 71% increase in their spending on international travel.
71% increase. That's huge.
It really is. Australia and Italy also moved up the spending rankings too. Shows changing travel patterns.
Definitely. Okay, let's quickly touch on why people were traveling and how. I know we have some 2022 data on that.
Yeah, the detailed breakdown always lags a bit, so this is from 2022, but it gives a good sense of the trends. Leisure travel definitely rebounded, making up 56% of international trips.
A slight increase from the pandemic years.
Exactly. During the peak disruption, things like visiting friends and relatives or VFR became relatively more important. But in 2022, leisure bounced back, while VFR and other purposes dropped a bit to 29%.
And how are people getting there? Mode of transport.
Air travel climbed back up to 56% share. Road transport fell back to 39%. It suggests we're kind of reverting to pre-crisis preferences, more flying for international trips again.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, finally, let's look forward. What are the early signals for 2024 telling us? Is a full recovery imminent?
The signs are pretty positive, actually. Looking at the first 7 months of 2024, international arrivals globally reached about 96% of the levels we saw in the same period back in 2019.
96%. That's really close.
It is. It strongly suggests that, barring major unforeseen events, we're likely on track for a full recovery in arrival numbers by the end of this year, 2024.
That would be quite the milestone.
It would. But we always have to add a note of caution. There are still challenges out there. Geopolitical tensions, economic headwinds like inflation, volatile oil prices, potential trade disruptions, ongoing conflicts. These things can definitely impact travel demand.
Absolutely. Constant factors to keep an eye on.
Always.
Okay, so to wrap up for our listeners, the big picture from 2023 is a really strong rebound for international tourism, hitting close to 90% of pre-pandemic arrivals and nearly 100% of spending.
Yep, with significant regional differences. The Middle East, way ahead, Asia Pacific catching up.
Right. Tourism's economic role remains massive, even if its rank among global exports shifted slightly. And we're seeing some interesting changes in who's visiting where and who's spending the most.
And the outlook for 2024 suggests we're very close to a full recovery in numbers, despite those ongoing global uncertainties.
So that leaves us with a final thought for everyone listening. Considering the strong recovery, but also the shifts we've seen, what do you think the long-term changes will be for international tourism?
Hmm, that's the big question, isn't it? Will regions like the Middle East keep outperforming? How much will sustainability concerns really start to reshape where and how we travel in the years ahead? Definitely something to mull over as the world keeps moving.